Welcome. My name is James Blake Wiener. I'm a co-founder of World History Encyclopedia, and I'm here today speaking to Jan van der Crabben, who is the CEO and founder of World History Encyclopedia. Thank you, Jan, for speaking with me. It's
Well,
always
thanks.
a pleasure to be with you.
Thank you for having me. I'm glad to be here.
I want to begin by asking you to tell us who you are. If you can, could you provide a brief sketch of your life with major milestones?
Sure. So my name's Jan. I'm originally from Germany. I now live in the United Kingdom. I've also lived in the US and France and Canada. Um, I launched World History Encyclopedia in 2009. So I think that's probably one of the milestones that I can mention. And I did that while I was working as a game designer in the video games world. I was working in historical strategy games, and I was researching a lot of historical topics for these games. And that's kind of what gave me the idea to start World History Encyclopedia, because I realized at the time especially there weren't any reliable sources of history which were both free and easy to understand and also reliable. Um, there was Wikipedia, which, is pretty good, but especially back then, and especially on more fringe topics of history, was not necessarily entirely trustworthy. And of course, there are academic journals. Some of them are behind a paywall that you can't afford, and some of them are just so specific that they're not useful for like general research to sort of get a general overview of the topic. And I think it's in this triangle that World History Encyclopedia places itself. And that's how it all got started, really.
And now I just want to touch upon your interest in the past. To me, it seems as though, Jan, you have two major kind of polar interests. One is history,
For sure.
perhaps. The other is technology.
Sure.
Have both of these been interests from a young age? What can you tell us about your passion for both of these topics and how you've synergized them and connected them?
Sure. Well, I mean, if we look at it chronologically, I think history probably comes first. I traveled a lot with my parents when I was younger, and my parents, especially when I was really young, when I was a kid, we traveled a lot to Greece, and my parents, my mother in particular, are huge history fans. So, as a little kid, I would be visiting all of those ancient Greek temples on the Greek islands, and it just fascinated me, and that fascination carried on. I was also always very interested in maps from a very young age. I would read like an atlas as if it was a picture book, and very nerdy. But that's what it is, and basically this idea of trying to understand the human past is something that fascinated me throughout my youth. I was also very much interested in mythology, which obviously is another way of looking at our past, right? And I had when I was at school in Germany, in order to graduate from high school, we have to pick four sort of major subjects, and history was kind of the main one for me. I chose that in high school, and because I just loved it. And then I went on to study at university. I actually studied journalism, not history, and then I studied war studies, which has a strong historical component.
Of course.
And with all of that together, that's kind of what drove my historical interest. And then
Yes, of
the
course.
tech interest as well. I mean, when I was a kid growing up, at first, I didn't have any computers around, but I got my first computer when I was 10, and I just loved it. And I was, of course, as a kid, probably for most kids, the primary entry point into computers is gaming. I love gaming. I was a big fan as well of the game Civilization, the first one, which is a historical strategy game, which got me very much thinking about history as well. And obviously that deepened my interest in computers and games in particular. And during my university time, I actually worked on a modification for the games Civilization 3 and 4, which was called the Ancient Mediterranean mod. That was one of the most popular modifications for that game, was downloaded, I don't know how many times, but loads, so that in the end I actually got involved in the sort of testing of Civilization 4 before it came out, because the developers invited me. And that kind of got me thinking, maybe I can combine those two things and, work in historical computer games, which I then did for the Total War series. It was a lot of fun, but at some point I realized that my true and my deepest passion is history, which is why I, sort of pivoted towards World History Encyclopedia at one point, and once I was able to be employed by it, I made it my full-time job with great pleasure.
If we can turn back the clock a little bit, the encyclopedia was founded in 2009.
Yeah.
In your recollection, what were the challenges that stood out in these first really crucial years of the encyclopedia's existence? And how were you able to translate these challenges into something very successful and used globally?
Right. Well, it was very challenging to get started. I think pulling any project out of nothing is a big challenge. And it just started as a little hobby project, a little website that I started programming, and it's entirely custom built. I mostly focused on the tech aspect of it. And when it was sort of ready to be filled with content, I started writing my own articles. I was doing all this work commuting on a train, actually, on my laptop. And I started writing my own articles, and I realized two things. The first thing was, actually three things. The first thing was that my articles were not very good. The second thing was that I didn't enjoy writing them. And the third thing was that I needed help. So unfortunately, around that time, I had just inherited some money because my grandmother died. So I used some of this money to pay for the first 100 contributions to the encyclopedia, which attracted several writers. One of them, a certain Joshua Mark, who was highly prolific, and he became one of the core writers and still is one of our core writers and directors on staff. And he just, after the money ran out that I had sort of allocated to that, because I wasn't like exactly rich, being freshly out of university, he just continued writing because he loved it, because he believed in our mission. And so it's really thanks to him that we got started in the beginning. And then, it grew slowly, very slowly. We had you joining in, James, helping us with sort of communication and social media. That helped greatly in growing the encyclopedia. We had Mark joining in later on as well, with initially photos and later articles. But I think for the first 4 years or so, things were just trickling along. We were not growing that much until there was a big Google update in 2013, which was called Hummingbird, and which Google said valued high quality content, and we just shot up at that moment. And that was really the moment where I was like, this could be more than just a little side project that I do in the evenings for fun, And I think it was the same for all of us, right? And then we had another such jump in 2015, thanks to another Google update. And for the most part, with a few exceptions, we have been growing ever since, thanks to the many writers who contribute to the encyclopedia, the editorial team, and the many volunteers who basically donate their time and their knowledge, as well as the many members and donors who support us financially and really help us make this possible. Without them, I don't think we would have survived a certain economic crises.
For sure. I wanted to ask you, what do you think, in your own words, makes the encyclopedia successful? Of course, there are many different variables at play here. The team, for example, but also perhaps the approach that you and the team agreed to follow through with, as well as, I would say, the great design, too. So what can you tell us about success and how you deliver success?
I feel like you've already answered that question for the most part, but I mean, just picking up on what you said, I do think it's the team. I really think we have a fantastic team, and that is due obviously to the people, but it's also due to how this team was built. Because we're a nonprofit organization, we don't just go out and hire people, but people volunteer for us, and they volunteer because they love what they're doing. They believe in the mission, and they believe that they are making a difference to the world, right? That we're doing something that changes the world, that changes history, education, and hopefully, therefore, has a positive impact on the world and how people understand each other, how they understand our histories, national identities, all of those things, right? And because the team volunteers, and at some point some of us become part of the paid staff once we can afford to, everybody is committed. Everybody works together to create something great. And all of us work from home. We don't have an office. So we're all like these little mini factories producing things that then come together and get assembled into something that is bigger than the sum of its parts, right? And so I think that's really part of it. And the other part is we always believed in quality over quantity. We always believed that ensuring that our articles are accurate, that they are well researched, filled with academic sources, that these things are essentially what drive the encyclopedia forward. And I think that's what our readers and teachers around the world value, and I don't think we want to compromise on that. I think that's also part of the recipe, really.
Now, on a lighter note, I wanted to ask you a kind of fun question. What's your favorite tool on the encyclopedia? This is a good moment for a plug-in here.
Favorite tool? Okay. I did not see that one coming. Now, let me think. I think the coolest tool that we have on the website is an editorial tool. And it's a tool that our translators use, or translation editors use, to review translations. Obviously, we do have people on our team who speak collectively quite a lot of languages. So we are able to natively review English, sorry, that's not a translation, we're translating from English, but Spanish, French, we are able to review Italian, German. So those are kind of the big languages that we can review on the team. There's some proficiency in Portuguese as well, but we now have translations to, I think, 42 languages. And as you can imagine, not every of these languages is spoken on the team. So we have this tool that basically takes the translation, it takes the original English, and then using machine translation through AI, we have a reverse translation back to English. And those are juxtaposed paragraph by paragraph so that the translation editors are able to see if the information in each paragraph is exactly the same. Obviously, they are not able to necessarily judge whether it's particularly well written, but they can judge if the information is correct. And I think that's a really cool tool, to be honest.
Right, certainly a powerful tool.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing. Now, I wondered if you might tell us a little bit about the time in which we had a big name change at the encyclopedia. Originally, of course, we were Ancient History Encyclopedia.
Yeah.
Now we are World History Encyclopedia. How did this happen? Why did it happen? Tell us more.
Right. Well, we started in 2009 as Ancient History Encyclopedia, as you said, and we slowly in the beginning, later more quickly started covering the ancient world, focusing initially sort of on the classical antiquity plus Mesopotamia and Egypt, but we then expanded across the world. We covered ancient China, ancient India, the Americas, a little bit of Africa, a little bit of Northern Europe, but at some point we felt like, okay, we've sort of covered the bases, at least the bases that are seen in schools. And I think it's important to note as well that we have a big document that our editorial team regularly researches and updates that looks at the curricula in the United States, Canada, the United Kingdom, Australia. We've recently also added Spain, France, and Mexico to this document to see what is it that students need to know, what is it that they are learning about in these countries. And that's how we guide the progression of the topics that we cover. And at some point we had sort of checked all of those boxes for antiquity, and we started writing about the Middle Ages and then about the early modern age, and then we started thinking we can't really call ourselves Ancient History Encyclopedia anymore, when we write about the Tudors and the colonization of the Americas. So we thought about it hard about how to do this right, because it's not easy to rebrand, especially on the internet. When you change domain name, you initially lose a lot of traffic, which we did. But we prepared for it for over a year, I think, got a new logo, worked with graphic designers and so on to essentially rebrand to World History Encyclopedia to better reflect what we were doing, but also to better reflect our aspirations of where we wanted to go in the long term. Like, we want to be essentially the website that if anybody thinks, oh, I wonder something about history, that they'll be like, oh, I'll check out World History Encyclopedia, So that's kind of our goal. We're not there yet, of course, it's a work in progress, but with the name such as World History Encyclopedia, that's more of a thing. That's more possible, right?
Right. So we've talked about your background, the background of the encyclopedia, its establishment, how it became the successful endeavor and resource it is today. I'd like to move on to the future, an unknown topic, but one which is of vital importance to all of us and certainly to the encyclopedia too.
Sure.
If you can, share with us what are some of the goals and plans of the encyclopedia as we move forward in time?
Well, I mean, as I just said, the encyclopedia wants to become essentially the reference for all of history for the world, really. And that means we need to expand into more subjects, into more eras, cover more countries. We are by far not done in any way. And I don't know if we'll ever be done with history because it's just so vast. The other thing as well is, if we want to be a worldwide encyclopedia that, and this is part of our mission statement, right, to improve history education worldwide, we need to be available in the languages of children in schools everywhere in the world because, not everybody is able to read in English or even to do research in English. So it's really important to us to translate into more languages and to reach more teachers and students and make this available to them for free so that they are able to use the encyclopedia to learn about history. So that means more translation. And finally, I think we found that, especially looking at sort of younger generations, there's a stronger reliance on video. So we already have a YouTube channel, of course, which is growing very rapidly, and we're very proud of that. But I think there's a lot more that could be done there. So not only on the English YouTube channel that Kelly is managing so proficiently, but also there might be space for other languages in YouTube channels. We might maybe branch out, have a Spanish one, or a French or German one, or maybe something completely crazy. I don't know. And finally, I think audio is also a subject that is growing quite a lot. We already do have a podcast, well, two podcasts actually. We have audio articles and we have interviews with history experts. These are currently parked a little bit, mainly because of staffing issues. We just don't have enough staff to do all of the things we want to do. But it's certainly something we will want to pick up again in the future. And I'm confident that that's going to be something that you will see restarting within the next year or so.
Wonderful. Now I have a bit of a philosophical question for you
I like those.
that I feel will be of interest to teachers and educators. How do you feel technology will shape and transform education in the future? We're witnessing in our own time the emergence of AI, for example.
That is a question that I ask myself pretty much every single day, and I haven't got a clear answer yet. But what I do think is that what we are looking at is we are looking at a shift in sort of our economy, in our learning, in our way of being that is going to be similar to the shift that was experienced during the Industrial Revolution. I think that when we went from a pre-modern to a modern era throughout the Industrial Revolution, we're going through a similar shift right now. And I think due to technology and the global interconnectedness that we have through the internet and the rapidity at which computers allow us to innovate and iterate on technology and advance, I think this shift is going to be much faster than it happened during the Industrial Revolution. So how that's going to change how we learn history, I don't know. I am both concerned and excited about the potential effects of AI. I think for us as an encyclopedia, there's obviously the danger that AI might be used by students to research topics. And, for now, AI is not exactly reliable in giving accurate answers, especially when it comes to sort of coherent texts relating to history, it doesn't mean that this will be true 10 years from now. So that could be an issue for us as an encyclopedia. It could also be an issue for humanity if people rely on AI and AI has been trained on content that has been written by humans, but then nobody reads human content anymore. What will AI use to learn about the world, you know? Will it just regurgitate its own content? I don't know. I think these are questions that many people who know a lot more about AI than I are thinking about at the moment. And then there are also the, you know, you asked about specifically about education, and I think in the education space, we might be able to see some great uses of AI. Obviously, many teachers right now are concerned about cheating and so on, which for good reason, I think. um, but uh, but you know, I recently saw what Khan Academy's plans are for their use of AI in a teaching environment. And I think that's a really interesting approach. They essentially want to use AI to provide students with sort of personalized AI tutors that will help them in their learning journey without giving them the answers, obviously. That will also be able to alert both the teachers and the parents if there are issues in the learning journey, if the students are going down sort of questionable routes, or whether the students are having specific issues with understanding of a specific subject. So the AI might be able to detect those things and then alert the human teachers to certain deficiencies so that the teacher can then step in and maybe do a one-on-one session with that specific student or a group of students who have similar issues to sort of refresh that. I think this would be amazing, right? Whether this will pan out, I don't know. But I think that could be really cool. So I am both very concerned and excited.
The future is being written right at this moment, so stay tuned.
I agree.
Final four questions, lighter
Go for
note,
it.
to help listeners get to understand Jan van der Krabben a little bit better. What's your favorite historical era, and do you have a favorite historical figure?
Yeah, yes to both. My favorite historical era, I mean, I generally love history. I think all historical eras are really exciting. And I have a few ones that I really like, but there are two that really stand out. I really like ancient Mesopotamia. I find it fascinating to see how humanity essentially took a similar ginormous step from being hunter-gatherers to building cities and civilizations. That you know, it might be a similar step to what we're going through now. We mustn't forget in Mesopotamia that took several thousand years to occur. But you know, this is a super interesting period, and it's a period that, despite being so long ago, still has so many impacts on our lives today. You know, simple things like 12 months, 60 seconds in a minute, and you know, 24 hours in a day. The way we write, the way we organize information, many of these things were essentially sort of decided back then. Uh, so I find that interesting. The other thing I find super interesting is how, you know, people back then, they were essentially the same as now. When you read these stories about what these people quarreled about and had court cases about and what they were worried about and letters they wrote, you know, they wrote about the same stuff that people care about right now. Of course, they believed in different gods. Of course, they had less technology, but they were no different from us. They were not any less clever than we were. They just had less tech. So yeah, that's Mesopotamia, and I'm really fascinated as well by this whole age of discovery. Um, Personally, I love discovering new things, and sometimes I wish I could have been back then on a ship sailing out to discover new lands. It would have probably been horrible and you know, bad food and dysentery and all of those things. But you know, this romantic idea is there. So I'm really interested by this period as well, and I'm quite fascinated as well to try to understand why is it that it was particularly Europe that sort of conquered the world at that time, where there were many other nations such as China or ancient India that had much stronger, better means to do the same and even more. They were much more powerful, but they didn't. So I think that's a really curious question that, you know, historians have been struggling with for many years, and you know, there are some interesting answers which probably go past this interview. But I think that's a really interesting period to look at as well.
And favorite historical figures.
Right,
Among
you mentioned
them,
that.
who in particular inspires you or whose story resonates with you on a personal level?
Um, there are obviously many, but I think the one that stands out for me is Alexander the Great, because he's a very divisive figure, right? He is somebody who is venerated in some parts of the world as this great military leader. At the same time, he is seen as an evil conqueror in other parts of the world. He was most likely insane, but he still achieved amazing feats. Like just from a human level, what he achieved is fascinating. And this figure with so many different facets of both greatness and insanity and brutality, I don't know, he makes for a very interesting character. And so I find him somebody that is worth looking into, whether you like him or not.
Of course. Another philosophical question. What's the inherent value of studying and preserving history?
Right, yeah, I mean, I think history is very important to study because history is essentially what informs us who we are, not really so much as individuals, also, but more as nations, as cultures. Our national and cultural identities are essentially defined by history, right? Where we come from. I mean, we're sitting here in Burgundy, in France, and just seeing the history here and how everything led to the point of where we are explains a lot about who the French people are and why they are the way they are and what they value, you know? And it's the same about the British, where I live at the moment in the UK. It's the same about the Germans, the Americans, right? Um, our history determines what do we value, why do we value it, and how do we see ourselves. But it also determines how do we see others, right? So many historical conflicts are driven by what happened in the past, perceived injustices in the past. I mean, I have I have spoken with some people from the Arab world who brought up the Crusades as the key points, right? That happened 1,000 years ago. So I think it's really important to use history to understand each other, to understand where we're coming from, because once we see how interconnected history is across time, but also across space between cultures, there is no such thing as like a monolithic national history, right? It's not like I don't know, British history is a thing on its own. Of course, it interconnects with everybody else's history, particularly Britain, because they were kind of everywhere. But, you know, I think it's important to understand that to really get a grasp of the world. And I think the more people know about history, the less xenophobia there will be, the more understanding there will be, and hopefully, therefore, the more peace and positive interaction there will be between cultures. That is my hope.
Final question. What has surprised you the most during your time as head of the encyclopedia? And how has the encyclopedia changed you, Jan?
Hmm. Yeah, I think what surprised me the most is actually how much it changed me. Uh, I went from doing this on the side, and I was quite junior in my career as well, and I had no clue how to manage a team at the time. I had even less clue on how to manage a company or a nonprofit organization, and so that was a big learning journey. How to run a nonprofit organization and a company. Those are more the sort of technical things to learn. But how to run a team is something that is, I think, often underestimated. And for me, it was really an internal learning journey that really led me to question who I am in relation to the team. How do I want to be sort of a leader? How much do I want to sort of have a say, or how much do I want to, you know, basically just facilitate things and help every team member to grow and to achieve better things. And especially in the early days, I oscillated a little bit between I want people to do what I say, and actually, no, wait, I actually want people to just I just want to facilitate, and so I ended up more in the facilitating camp and wanting to just create a good atmosphere, helping everybody realize what they want to do and helping them achieve that, and essentially leveling up people as we go, building a culture that is conductive to good teamwork. And I feel like I haven't quite gotten there yet. There's still a lot to learn, but I have certainly come a long way.
History is full of surprises, and certainly the encyclopedia has rewarded you so much.
Oh, for
Congratulations on
sure.
all your success, and thank you so much for sharing your thoughts and your recollections and your personal sentiments with us.
Well, thank you, James, for this interview. And I also want to take this moment to thank our readers and our donors and our members for being with us in this journey, for supporting us in all the different ways there are, whether through their encouraging words or financial contributions. I really appreciate it. We wouldn't be able to do this without you.
Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you.